Welcome to Washington Park School. We are here for Park Place Productions in cooperation with Totowa News. Today we have with us our first grade teachers at Washington Park, Miss Murphy, Mrs. Metzler, Mrs. Reed, Mrs. Sudiak, and Mrs. Denherter. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you.
The focus of today's show is going to be the Totowa's 100th anniversary. And if you could share some of your views and some of the things you've been doing with your students.
Does anyone go first? Okay.
It has given us a wonderful opportunity to tell the children about growing up in the 40s. They really loved hearing the story about my grandma's icebox and the meat delivery. Chris the Meat Man used to come, and my favorite radio programs. And in 1946, we had one of the first TVs, a 12-inch set, and the children thought that was very, very funny, of course.
Anyone else?
We focused more on what schools would be like, and what the town would be like, and how rural it was, and what they would not have if they were living when Totowa was born. They wouldn't have school buses to take them to school. They'd have to walk. They'd be in a classroom where all different age children would work, and the older ones would have to help the younger ones. They wouldn't have the books or the papers or the supplies that we have. And there would be a lot of what we call chalk and talk.
We've been discussing ways to get around, means of transportation in the last 100 years, what kind of clothing the children and adults will be wearing. And just today we were discussing if the children had a choice, how they would like to dress, and what would they prefer, living in the last 100 years, going back 30, 40, 50 years ago, or living today and being a student in Totowa. So we've been having fun.
Now, I also noticed that you probably don't come dressed like this every day. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, today we're wearing clothing suited to the times. 100 years ago, the old-fashioned school teacher, the cameo pins, as you'll notice. And this morning we sang our song written by Mrs. Metzler, which I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing. And the boys and girls have just had an overall enjoyment of all this.
Now, you mentioned this morning's, the song that we sang this morning. Tell us a little bit about that, and our viewers will hear that in a few minutes.
Well, we first had a meeting town-wide of what might be done in the school. And Mrs. Metzler and I were talking one day, and we said, maybe we have a lot of talent in first grade. Miss Murphy's clever with her poems. And so that night, Mrs. Metzler went home and she wrote a 5-verse song totally about Totowa. And we taught it to the children, and it is sung to the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And it's one knock your socks off song that we've all enjoyed, and the children have really gotten into it.
Mrs. Metzler, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write these words?
It woke me up in the middle of the night, and I usually have a paper and a pencil, and I start writing things down. But I needed some information, and I used the 75th anniversary yearbook, the memory book, to get some additional information, because I started running out of verses after about verse 3. And I needed a little history, and that's where I went into the book. And when I got it in our media center, we must have 20 copies upstairs.
Now, some of you have lived in Totowa for quite a while, and Miss Murphy, you've been a lifelong resident.
Yes.
Mrs. Reed now lives in Totowa, and Miss Sudiak tells us that she was a resident here from 3rd grade on. Can anybody remember any memories about being a student in the Totowa school system?
Well, it was a few years ago. And I remember starting with Mrs. Boppile in kindergarten, and anyone who went through Memorial School knows Mrs. Boppile. And the big event of the day was to be sure you had the front of your chair on the inner circle, and the outer circle was for the back of your chair legs. But it was fun going all through Totowa school system. And of course, I've been teaching for 37 years, and a lot of the values that I gained through my schooling here I've been using with my own children in my classroom.
I can remember as a student here, my kindergarten room is now Mrs. Fiorella's classroom. And I remember when I graduated from Memorial, back then it was K-8, and students came to Memorial for kindergarten, And then first through fourth grade, if they lived at that end of town, they came to Washington Park and came back to Memorial School in grade 7 and 8. And I remember being in that kindergarten classroom, and I've told this story a few times since I've come back, is that I think the first time I came to Memorial after I was hired here, I went back to that classroom to still see if there was a black circle painted on the floor, because the classroom is made as a hardwood floor classroom. And I remember that black circle there and having to sit on that circle. And I remember they had different play corners there, and it was the doll corner back then, which is interesting. And then they had the bowling pins set up. So the kindergarten day was a half day then as well. But it's amazing how, I spent 9 years at Memorial Kindergarten through 8th grade, and I never attended Washington Park School. So the building holds a lot of memories for me, and it was really a big part of my childhood growing up there.
And also the sandbox and where to place everything. And you had to be careful to keep the sand off the floor. You had to be a careful player.
Ooh, that's true. I think that's a very big difference between then and now. And the children in my class think that the worst thing about having to come to school 100 years ago was that in the winter, in the cold, they would have to run outside and find the outhouse and quickly do what they had to do and get right back inside. That does not appeal to them. And the fact that the teacher could walk around with a stick in her hand and use it when she wanted to use it, that they weren't too happy about either.
Well, the interesting thing, too, Memorial School was built in 1906, so we're not far from that 100-year mark there for that building. And that building has gone through many changes. It used to be just the front portion of it, and then I think they added the right side wing to the back, and eventually I think came around in the circle there.
Both my mom and dad went to that school too, and they enjoyed it very much. And it was, as you said, just a little building at the time.
So in a little while, we're going to switch to the students singing the Battle Hymn of the Republic. What about back then? I vaguely remember in first grade having some of the wooden desks with the ink hole cut in them.
They were permanently fixed to the floor.
Right? That's right.
Couldn't move them.
And it was really true about the pigtails going in the inkwells. Any boy who sat behind you got the end of your hair. It worked. And the person who was in charge of filling those inkwells at the end of the week was a very special person. You had to be the good student for the week to get that honor. I remember in Mrs. Riker's class, Mary Riker, in your 7th grade, we used them, and that's the only way you took a spelling test. You had to dip your pen in the ink and write. Of course, it would go flat all over, and you try to explain that you really had it spelled right. Many times she would say, well, all right, that's fine, be more careful the next time. But we did have fun with that inkwell.
Now, what about the differences in teaching styles and the differences in students and parents? Let's go back to that. How really has education, from your perspective, evolved from when you first started your careers to today's day and age?
I think the teacher was always right, and now we're not. That if you sent a note home about behavior or anything like that, the child really paid a price for his misbehavior. And now they want to know, well, what did you do wrong that the child behaved in this fashion? We're more interested now in motivating the children to learn and in giving them many different viewpoints, not just one viewpoint. It's a much broader education.
Well, being the one who's been in teaching probably the longest number of years, I would say that I really believe that children are the same basically, but it's just that they have different interests, and I think we have a lot to compete with Nintendo, the movies, all those things. Children are accustomed to so much entertainment, and so we really have to be very animated. Yes, we have to be animated in the classroom. It's very true. But basically, children are children.
It's exciting to face the future, though, with the technology that we have now, with the computers and the internet and many of the things, even this video studio, for the children have that opportunity to gain so much more over what children in the past have. they really have many opportunities for their careers.
This is true, but you know what I miss the most? When I first started, I could take my children out, down from the school that I taught in Bloomfield, walk them down to Bloomfield Center, to the library, stop at the Carvel on the way back. I didn't have to take anyone with me. The thought of things happening just wasn't there, and it was a freer atmosphere. It was fun, a lot of fun.
Well, I think also that even looking back to, as the administrator in the building, I remember back as a student, the principal was always looked at as the bad guy. And, if you had to go to the principal's office, it would, it was a very, very serious thing. And I think even today, not only in Totowa and other districts as well, the role of the teacher and the role of the administrator, it's more of a collaborative effort. I think, here we're involved with more positive things and we're involved with negative things. And the whole promotion of the district to the community. And, we've had to take on a lot of role of the family. And I think that's probably one of the major changes that's taken place throughout the years. We're responsible for many, many things, and even today in today's news with the newspaper and the state getting involved with, what is the role of the district? Should we be providing health care? Should we be providing after-school care for students in need? I mean, where does the role of the educator end and where does it begin? And I think that's probably our biggest challenge that we're facing in the 90s is, educating students and being responsible for their entire well-being. Okay, so at this point now, we're gonna cut and take a trip to our all-purpose room where this morning our first grade teachers coordinated the entire effort of the song that you'll see in several minutes. Thank you very much for joining us.
Totowa's 100th birthday. Our song was written by Mrs. Metzler. We hope you enjoy it. It was 100 years ago that Totowa was born. It happened very thoughtfully upon the drifting shore. It has it all the hills and flats, the rivers and mountains. Happy 100th birthday, Totowa. A real
Okay, welcome back to Park Place Productions. We hope you enjoyed the performance by our first grade students. Today we have some very, very special guests with us, and I'd like to introduce Michelle Brigliadoro, Kelly Krautheim, Michael Evans, Allison Gibbons, Sean McAteer, and Samantha Polizzi. Welcome to our show, folks. Can you say welcome?
Welcome.
All right. Today we're talking about Totowa's birthday. How many of you had a birthday recently? Recently? Very good. And I bet, how many of you are 100 years old? Nobody. But Totowa is 100 years old as of last Sunday, March 15th. Isn't that something? So we had a little birthday party for Totowa. And all this year we're going to have different things going on in town, like parades and concerts. And last Saturday night we had a dinner dance for your parents. And we had a lot of fun. And I noticed that everybody has some very, very special dresses on. Who can tell me about why you're dressed like that? First of all, Mr. McAteer, are we allowed hats in school?
No,
Just for today, though, right? How come?
because this is what they wore 100 years ago.
Oh, they wore that 100 years ago. What about the ladies? Can you tell me a little bit about your dresses? Samantha?
Well, we have them down to here because 100 years ago they had them way down to the floor.
Oh, they did. Styles are different today, do you think, Kelly?
Yes.
What happened to the dress styles today compared to the years ago?
Well, they got different and changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They got a little shorter and stuff.
A little shorter, yeah. That's true. Now, you've been talking about what life was like 100 years ago in school? First of all, does everybody like school?
Yes.
You have to say that because you're on TV, huh?
No. I really do.
Sean really likes school. That's good. What about, how do you think it was 100 years ago? Who knows? Michael?
I don't really know.
You don't really know. Michelle?
Well, there's woods and then, like, you can walk to school and there's, like, no buses or cars. So you had to walk back and forth from school and to home and you can, like, walk in the woods.
And we can't do that today, huh?
No.
Because everybody either take the bus or your mom and dad picks you up, and very few people walk back and forth to school. I remember when I was in kindergarten, I walked to school by myself. Me and a couple of friends that lived on my street. And I grew up on Jefferson Place, and I went to memorial school, kindergarten through 8th grade. That's what it was like back then. And I walked by myself, and I came home for lunch because we couldn't fit all the students to stay in all day long and have their lunch, so I had to come home. But some of you live too far, huh? You wouldn't be able to walk back and forth. What were some other things that were different about school back then that you learned in your classes? Mike?
There were one-room schoolhouses.
One-room schoolhouses. And I think there was a wooden building at some point. I remember seeing a picture of that. And then Memorial School, which you're going to be going to when you get into 5th grade, that was built in 1906. So that building is almost 100 years old, because in the year 2006, and we're not far from there, are we? It's 1997, 1998 right now. So we're almost 100 years from there, and that building is going to be 100 years old. What do you like about school now? What do you think you have it easier than you had before? Sean?
Well, now we have more classes, and when everyone gets to eat, they don't have to go home. We in the classroom, and I don't know anything else.
Well, okay. How about you, Allison? Do you have any ideas?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Samantha?
I'm getting a little bit better at math.
Are you? That's very good to hear.
Math and spelling.
Kelly?
Well, 100 years ago, the teacher used to whack you and you used to learn a dunce cat, but now you don't. Or like, here because you don't get to wear a dunce cap and the teacher's not.
No, I think today's philosophy, we try to help everybody do a good job instead of punishing people to do a good job. Things have changed a little bit in that respect. Sean?
And 100 years ago they didn't have computers in schools, but now we do.
Yeah, today we have so much more information, computers and internet, and you can get information immediately. Back then you had to either look in a book, and if you didn't have encyclopedias, then you didn't have any access to the information. Also, there were no TVs. Could you imagine life without a TV?
Yes.
You could?
Yes. Yep. I had to sit by the radio.
Mm-hmm.
There was no electricity back then.
What was that like?
There was no electricity back then. Yes, there was.
No electricity. At some point there was no electricity, and everything used to be candlelit or gaslit. I used to work in a school that still had the gas lamps on the walls. They didn't use them anymore, but there were gas lamps there. And now we have electrics, and it's easy. We just turn on a switch. So life is a lot easier now, and I think back then was probably a lot tougher to get the things that we have now. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. That's our bell for the change of period. I'd like to thank you for coming, and you were all very, very good guests, excellent guests. Did you like being on the show?
Yes.
All right, so we'll have to keep an eye on PBTV to find out when this program airs, okay? Okay, thank you very much, and have a nice day.